Hi guys, we're back to talk more about the biodiversity lab. And I'm going to pull up the spreadsheet again. This time we're going to talk about the graph, the column chart or bar chart that I'm asking you guys to make. Okay, so this is this FRC diversity data. It shows already the different calculations that you guys should have worked through in the first part. And then the next thing that we want to do is make a graph that shows the variations in diversity abundance across different species. So we're going to make a chart that includes the north-facing slope and the south-facing slope as separate series on the same column chart. But before we do this, what we want to do is we want to highlight all the different species, and not only that column A that contains the names of the species, but we want to drag across all the other data that's associated with each species. And then we want to sort that data according to the abundance of that species on the north-facing slope. Since there's more total individuals on the north-facing slope, we're going to sort according to the species abundance there. So remember, when we want to sort our data, we have to highlight the data in the column that we're looking at, and then all the other rows that are associated with that data set. And then we go up to the data option along the top, and then we choose the sort option. And in this case, we want to sort according to column B, the NI on the north-facing slope, the species abundance on the north-facing slope. So we're going to sort according to column B, and we're going to sort, instead of from smallest to largest, we're going to sort from largest to smallest. So I changed in that drop-down menu here. And then I'm going to say, okay. And it's going to rearrange the data so that the species that is most commonly occurring, which happens to be trail marker on the north-facing slope, is showing up at the top, then Douglas fir seedlings, incense cedar, etc. And then those things that are really not abundant, like manzanita and western buttercup, are at the bottom. And then notice, since the species abundance is different on different slopes, that same order is not maintained on the south-facing slope, but we can't do both at once. So we'll just be satisfied with having our data organized according to the species abundance on the north-facing slope. So once we've done that, we're ready to make our graph. And when we make a graph, remember, first of all, don't have any data highlighted when you start to insert your graph. And then you want to go up to the menu along the top, and you choose Insert here. Oh, okay. And then we're going to choose from the charts. Before, we have made some data with these XY scatter plot charts. And XY scatter plot charts are when you have two different data that are both numbers that you're comparing against one another. So like a certain number of fish food, milligrams of fish food, compared to a certain number of algae growth, a certain number of square centimeters of algae growth. So there's numbers compared to numbers. But in this case, we're comparing a species, a name of a species, compared to a number, abundance of that species. So in that case, XY scatter plot is not what we're doing. Instead, we're going to be doing a column or a bar chart. We're going to do it as a column chart so that they're standing up vertically. So we'll click this, and we'll just choose this side-by-side columns here. Okay, so we have a blank chart since I didn't have any of the data highlighted. Remember, if you do have a chart pop up, it's probably not the chart that you want. So the first thing you want to do is right-click inside the chart area, go to Select Data, and then if there's anything in here, you want to click it on the left-hand side and remove it. So you want to do that. And then once you have a blank chart, you also actually want to go back and do the exact same thing. Right-click on the graph. You want to select data. And now you're going to choose which data you want to show up. So we're going to, first of all, add the data from the north-facing slope. We're going to add data. And then we're going to call this north-facing slope because this is the species abundance on the north-facing slope. And then we're going to go down to these series values. And remember, Excel has this 1 in brackets placeholder. So we'll highlight that, delete that, and then click on the first value that has a species abundance, and then hold click on your mouse down, drag down to the bottom number, and make sure that you don't include the 48, the total abundance, just the individual species abundance, and then let go. And then you'll see that there's a bunch of different columns of different heights. The taller the column represents, the more of that species there is. And at this point, the columns are just numbered, so we can't see on our graph which number column represents which species, but we'll fix that in a minute. But we can certainly see that there's different column heights representing different species with different levels of abundance. So we'll say, okay. And now we're going to add another series. So we'll do add. And again, we could call it south-facing slope. I should also show you that you could just go over and click on the cell that already says south-facing slope. It's kind of a shortcut to do the same thing. And then we'll go down to our series values. We'll highlight that and delete that one in brackets, that placeholder. And then we'll come up and click on the top value for a species and notice that it's 0. There's no trail marker on the south-facing slope, but if we want the columns to line up, we have to start at the same place that we started on the north-facing slope. So we'll start here and we'll drag down to the last species, which is in row 14, Western Buttercup, and then we'll let go. And then we'll see now there's a bunch of other columns. In this case, they're showing in red, and they represent the abundance of the species on the south-facing slope. So they're not in that nice sloping order that they are on the north-facing slope. But again, we can't have both showing up the same way unless we were going to make two separate graphs, which would be another way to do this. But now, for now, we'll say, okay. So the last thing that we want to do while we still have our select data option open is we want to edit our horizontal or category axes labels. So again, along the bottom right now, there's just these numbers. The columns are numbered 1 through 12, but we don't know what 1 means or what 3 means or what 9 means. So if we want to edit that and actually give these labels, we can click on this edit button, and then we can come over here to the species names, right? So this is why we're making a column graph instead of an XY scatter plot graph. We can add names in instead of numbers. So we'll click on trail marker, the first species, just drag down towards Western Buttercup, and then say, okay. And now you can see that the names of the different species show up. So now we can say, okay. So we have our graph here. We can see which species is which. We can see how many of these different species occurred in these different locations by looking at these numbers here on the vertical axis. But this graph isn't done yet because it doesn't have a title and the axes aren't actually labeled yet with units. So we know because we collected this data that these numbers over here represent the species abundance, but somebody else might not know that. They may think those are like pounds of plants or something like that. So remember, if we want to add features to our graph, we can click on this chart elements button. And remember, this option will not appear if we're clicked away from the chart. We have to be clicked on the chart to have this option. We'll see it here when we are not when we clicked off the chart, but when we're clicked on the chart, we can also see it up at the top. We can add chart elements. This plus sign is just a shortcut to get there. So one, we want to add a legend because we want other people to know what the blue and the red columns mean. And also we might ourselves want to remember if we come back and look at this data later and don't remember which is which. We also want to include axes titles, and we also want to include a chart title. So we'll click on those things and then we'll go off, and then we'll come back in here and we'll want to give our chart a title. So we just highlight that chart title placeholder, and then we can call this our species abundance graph, or just call it species abundance. And then down here, these obviously represent species. That's pretty intuitive, but we'll just be really thorough by including that. And then over here, our vertical column is, do you know what it is? Hopefully you know that it is the species abundance, how many individuals there are of each species. So A, B, U, D, A, N, C, E, and then I'll in parentheses just write number. I do a pound sign, aka hashtag, which is just a symbol for just a count, a number that there are. Okay, so now we can also click on individual things and drag them around. So I can like center my title if I wanted. I can drag, make my title a little bit bigger. I could click on my legend and I could move the whole thing somewhere else if I want. I could make my graph bigger. Anyway, you can drag the individual parts around, but basically you've got your graph. One last thing that I want to show you guys how to do is you can actually change the colors or the shading of your graph. And this is really good if you're going to ever end up printing graphs in black and white. So when you print things in black and white, a lot of the colors just kind of show up as gray and they're hard to see. But if you have one of the like data points or the columns in your graph, something that is like a different shape or a different type of shading, then usually it's easier to see the difference between them, even in black and white. So let's click on this south-facing slope option. So you can see I clicked on this bar here and then all these red columns are highlighted. So now I'm going to click on that again and I'm going to come down here to where it says format data series. And once I do that, I'm going to click on this little bucket, this little paint bucket here, which is the symbol for like, what am I going to fill this in with? And I'm going to say my fill. Right now, it's just automatically choosing red for me, but I'm going to say I want to choose a pattern fill. Okay, so now instead of just having it be a solid color, I can choose like bricks or lines or dots or hashing or diamonds or whatever, but something that's going to look distinct from the north facing slope, even if this ends up being printed in a black and white type of color. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys how to do that, and then we can close that out, and now we're all done. So you're gonna practice doing this with the FRC data set with the two series, the north facing slope and south facing slope. And then you're also gonna do this with your data set that you calculate. And in that case, you'll just only have one column of data to graph. So you only have one set of columns versus two, but you can go through and practice graphing or making that column chart again. Okay, that's a good stopping point.